First of all, the Indian Act is racist. It's outdated. The way everything is written in that legislation. First of all, let me back up. It wasn't the Indian Act was not part of the treaty negotiations. Going back to the 1880s, that was not on the radar. The chiefs were blindsided, and they had no knowledge that there was previous legislation amalgamated to form the Indian Act of 1876. So again, it is not their creation. It is not their desire, not their wish. And so today, the legislation is crafted in such a way that we, as First Nations, I have no land rights on my reserve because everything is owned literally by the Queen. In this case, now the minister on behalf of, I guess now the King. And so if I was to still be living on my reserve today, I could not, if I have, and let's say if I had an acreage on the reserve or some agricultural lands passed down to me by my father, I could not take that to the bank and say, here's what I have for collateral. I need to borrow $1 million because I want to buy a brand new combine. The bank would literally laugh and say, no, you can't. You have no collateral because that land is not yours, Milton Tootoosis, and we don't recognize it as yours. It belongs to the king, and so I would be basically screwed, and I would have no recourse. So again, we can't use our land as collateral, and that might be a good thing, right? I'm not saying it's totally bad because when you look at a map of Saskatchewan, there's one here in my office I'm peeking at. When you look at this massive landmass of the province of Saskatchewan alone, and you see all the red dots on the map that represents the Indian reserves or Indian lands reserved for Indians as per the Indian Act. We've only got maybe 5% of the land mass left. And why was I saying that? Because at the end of the day, that land is virtually worth nothing to the bankers, to the banking system. So First Nations cannot create wealth that way as per the average Saskatchewanian or average Canadian, unless you opt out of the Indian Act. Certain sections of the Indian Act, there's about 30 sections, I believe, that First Nations can now opt out and introduce their own legislation, which puts them in a better situation so that the bankers and the banking system can actually acknowledge that maybe there is a form, another model, a new way, a better way to use land as collateral. So again, wealth creation is not possible under the Indian Act is what I'm getting at. I think we have to understand that our chiefs and our elders, I used to work for the Office of the Treaty Commissioner for 10 years. So I spent a decade of my life listening, reading, researching, but primarily listening to our elders, who are the experts when it comes to treaty and interpretation of Treaty Number 6 in this instance. And they 100% agree. Many of them have passed away now because of age, and they all agree that when we were in treaty negotiations back in 1876, our ancestors never agreed to give or sell the land. They agreed to share the land. Very two different concepts. And so they always say, so it should still be our land, shouldn't it? Right? And when people in today's context, when our lawyers and our legal scholars, Indigenous lawyers, ask the question to, say, the minister responsible for First Nations or Indigenous peoples, they won't answer that question. When I worked in the bureaucracy, I used to work for Indian Department of Indian Affairs, and when I was on council, you would never hear the bureaucrats say the word treaty. They would always just say, it's our policy, it's the minister's policy, or it's the government's policy. And so so let's start there. You have to have an understanding that there's this outstanding treaty business. When you hear the words, there's outstanding treaty business, And you'll hear it from the Assembly of First Nations to their regional chiefs, and they'll always say that. And that is why, because they want to bring that conversation back, because that's where it all starts. The government, when Confederation came about in 1930, they unilaterally made a decision to transfer all the lands and its resources to the provinces here in Saskatchewan, Alberta, uh, called the Natural Resources Transfer Act. I actually just heard Premier Scott Moe on the radio, CBC, this morning, because he's going to war with Ottawa over the carbon tax credit issue. But he mentioned the NRTA. And I would say to him and to anybody listening, the NRTA was, the Indians were not invited to the NRTA meetings back in 1930. Again, just like the Indian Act, right? That was not negotiated, that was not agreed upon. So the question you need to ask is, who helped themselves to that land under whose authority and jurisdiction? So the chiefs today will argue to their death that we never gave up the land. We never sold the land. We just agreed to share. So we should get a percentage of the proceeds and benefits you're reaping from all those natural resources. They've been advocating for resource revenue sharing for quite some time. Some corporations are now entering, and it's a good thing, are now entering into impact benefit agreements. So they are procuring services, they're creating jobs for the indigenous community. But First Nations, by and large, as far as I know, are not getting dividends. They're not getting royalty payments like the province of Saskatchewan is. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there. Something for you to ponder and do some more research as students. The 1930 NRTA, Natural Resource Transfer Act, and ask those questions. Were First Nations invited to the party? Did they agree to that? And the short answer is no. And these are questions that need to be asked to the current political leaders, because unless that's resolved, and I hope it's resolved in my lifetime, and maybe your generation will still be talking and debating it, but unless there's a true economic reconciliation vis-a-vis revenue sharing in a meaningful way, because I do know this as a matter of fact, when I was on council, I was appalled to see the transfer of resources and the amount being transferred to my nation and what was really needed to catch up with the housing, to fix the infrastructure, as an example, to catch up with the rest of society was appalling, shocking, and the percentage of resources allocated to our schools on reserve is also another big issue, right? And if the bottom line is First Nations are getting far less resources to manage a school on a reserve as compared to a school off reserve in the neighboring RM. And that needs to be addressed. So I think if we had resource revenue sharing, that could be real economic reconciliation policy that would help pay for some of the shortfalls from the promises that were made under treaty a century ago. It wouldn't be the full solution, but at least it'd be a good part of that economic solution and stress that First Nations are under. And it's part of the solution. It is a tool, if I understand your question. I sometimes have a difficulty trying to interpret English into Cree, because a lot of times I'm thinking like a Nehio, like a Cree, and sometimes our views differ. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're very different. But at the end of the day, it's about a concept that my ancestors taught me, my elders, about a concept called Bimaji Suwin. Bimaji Suwin is a universal concept, but in my culture, in my worldview, it means the ability to take care of oneself. Prior to colonization, prior to the arrival of first white men on Turtle Island, native peoples were taking care of themselves. They were intertribal trading nations. Yes, they had the odd war, they had conflicts too, but they somehow figured out how to settle those wars and those conflicts. There's usually over territory, but they figured out. They realized that we need to stop this nonsense and quit having intertribal warfare because we have a bigger war, bigger battle to fight, and that is the disruption and the invasion of settlers. But coming back to your question, yeah, those are tools definitely, and I think strategies that more First Nations need to adopt and are adopting because we don't have the capital, we don't have the know-how, the technical know-how, so we need to find good allies. And it's like the Seminole tribe in Florida uh, when they purchased the Hard Rock Cafe chain about a decade ago. They didn't know how to flip hamburgers. They didn't know anything probably about the music industry or how to manage a world class enterprise. So they partnered, right? They are the owners of the Hard Rock Cafe chain, but they don't operate it. They let somebody else manage it, and they just reap the financial rewards from that investment. And maybe someday they'll flip it and they'll sell it to the next buyer, and they'll likely turn a nice profit. So we don't necessarily, as First Nations, have to have always have the technical know-how, and we don't usually have the capital, but we need to go out and find the partners who do, allies who are willing to help out in that regard. So yeah, I think first and foremost, it'd be naive to say let's shut off all the gas lines or the what do you call them? The extractive resources, because at the end of the day, when we there's a lot of debates about that, but we pipelines, right? That's might kind of be a sticky one. But when it comes to rare earth minerals, I've recently learned just by attending a summit here in Saskatoon about 3 weeks ago. I quickly learned that we need those minerals, rare earth minerals, to produce batteries, right? For our iPhones, for our computers, for our electric vehicles, right? So we need to embrace these new sectors, but also do it responsibly. When we talk about ESG principles, something I learned a year ago now, there's a lot of talk about environment, social, and governance principles. I think they need to add the I, and that's it stands for the indigenous component. I would say ESG principles are quite in line with traditional indigenous worldview and principles. Think of it, ladies and gentlemen. Indigenous peoples have been on these lands for thousands of years. Thousands of years. The land was respected. Our ancestors only took what they needed to survive, to sustain their lives day in, day out. They survived a harsh climate. They didn't need air conditioners. They didn't need internet. They didn't need electric vehicles, but they survived. They were thriving intertribal trading nations and very innovative in their time. And in a very short time that we've had capitalism and industrialization on this continent, where are we today? You know, it begs the question, like who had it right? And I would argue indigenous peoples had it right all along. And only now is the Western world starting to realize maybe, just maybe, we should start listening to the worldview and philosophy and values of those indigenous peoples, because they lived on that land, pristine, clean land, clean water source for a long, long time. And I would say climate change and these issues we're talking about nowadays are all attributed to capitalism, population growth, et cetera, and industrialization. So I think the world needs to know and learn and understand our ancient culture, our worldview, and our ancient systems of governance in order to help solve some of the today's problems. In short, I'm for it as long as it's done sustainably, as long as it's done carefully, and as long as it's done with some science, but also some philosophy, indigenous philosophy and values, right? So just take what you need, don't overexploit, repatriate the land to what it used to be, right? Once they're done their mining exploration, put things back in place, right? Take care of the water. Don't contaminate the water nearby. There's aquifers, say on my land at Poundmaker, right? We have issues, and I think we need to research, do a little bit more research in terms of the potential impacts of agricultural products like fertilizers, sprays, fertilizers, you name it, pesticides, and has there been an impact on the aquifers underground that we can't see? Because today we're hearing citizens from the community saying we've got these new diseases that we never heard of before. Different cancers, different form of ailments that are now resurrecting. Is that a result? Could that be as a result of the chemicals being used on our farmlands? Right, and we got some of the best farmlands in the province. So, but again, better yields. Is it paying off? Yeah, it's short term. Farmers turned a nice profit, but at what expense, right? So again, these are things we need to study and research, and that's where the world of Western science comes in, right? So, but I think if they adopt the indigenous value system of taking what you need, leaving the rest for the next guy, for your neighbor, I think that would be a good approach, right, for long-term sustainability. The obvious would be jobs, right? Who wouldn't? Yeah. Who's going to argue? Like we need good paying jobs, procurement opportunities for indigenous suppliers. Those are given. But for me, as I grow older, the more I hear and read, it's about taking care of Mamo Kika, we know our Mother Earth, right, and all that she provides. Wise elders have told me, and I've heard this before. They've said, it just struck me when they said, when you think about it, humans need her and all that she provides more than she needs us, right? And so if we don't take care of her, we could perish because we need her. We need her and all that she provides, the medicines, the water, the nutrients she provides for the crops, for the products, and all that she provides. Is when you think of it from a different angle, from an indigenous worldview, those all those things you see on the land could survive without us. They have so for millions of years, but we couldn't. It seems like we can't survive very long without them. So who's really in control? Right? So something to think about. Question you should be asking as students is how richer do certain people need to get? Right? How much is enough? Like my goal is if personally if I can make a six-figure income, that takes care of my bills. I can put a little bit away for my kids and grandkids' education, for example. Go away from my annual vacation. Okay? Save up for retirement. Do I need to make $1 billion a year? Do I need to make 10 billion? How much is enough? Right? I could probably be a philanthropist, but I still wouldn't be happy if we had, and it'd be of no use to society if I was sick and if there was no clean water left. Right? I think the older I'm getting, the more concerned I've become about the urgency and the need to protect our waters. Saskatchewan, I think Canada is one of you guys might know the statistic, but one of the rare countries on earth that has fresh water. And we're one of the jurisdictions that still has a high quality clean water, whereas everywhere in many countries around the world, it's quickly evaporating and because of droughts, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so I'm becoming, I guess, an environmentalist to a degree. I never thought I'd say that. I'm not a tree hugger, I guess, however that's defined, but I am concerned because I am now a grandpa. That's the other thing. That's what motivates me. I have two grandchildren, beautiful grandchildren. They're 6 years old. And this, and I look at them and I often wonder, what are they inheriting? They have no idea what they've walked into, right? With all these challenges, and they had nothing to do with it. It was our grandfathers, our great grandfathers on the industrial side, not so much mine, but maybe yours, who had an active role in it and participated in it, got wealthy from it, right? And so, was it really worth it in the end? And some, not trying to be a fear monger, but I would say, man, I don't know, it was all worth it. When you look at the climate change, global warming, and what's happening worldwide, so.
Yeah, definitely something to look at. And especially, working in resources as young people, it's definitely something that we're always thinking about too. So I think that's the end of our questions today, Milton. It's been so fantastic having you, and thank you for that wonderful conversation. We really appreciate it.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, and feel free to reach out by email, mtootoosis@sreader.com. Lily, I think you've got my email. Somebody does. Feel free to share, and I'll try to respond when I can. And follow me on social media. I'm all over. I've got a good presence for an old guy, an old baby boomer. I'm doing pretty good on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, even TikTok. Yeah, this old guy's a TikToker. So all the best.
You got it all.
Yeah. Okay.
Definitely make sure to follow you.
In our culture is another teaching, guys. We never say goodbye. We say Kihtoam Mina. We shall see you. We shall meet again.
We shall meet again.
Thanks so much, Milton. We'll see you soon.
Take care, guys.
Thank you very much.
All right.